Alrighty, everyone. Well, I'm Joe Powell again from the University of Houston Energy Transition Institute. I'll be moderator today, and I'm going to kick off geothermal. We're going to ask each of our panelists how they got started in geothermal, and then they'll tell you more about themselves, and then a little about the activities that they're up to. And so I'll get it kicked off. I got started in geothermal about 3 days ago when Ramanan asked me to chair this panel. I am from Shell. We gatekeeped on geothermal for quite some time. I don't think we dived in because of how globally impactful and the amount of penetration. So that'll be one of the questions to resolve today. But excited to be here and talking about it. I picked up some neat history slides about some of the early developments going back to the early 1900s, quite a bit on the West Coast area there in California and such, and in France. And so it's not exactly new technology, but in terms of impact moving forward, and certainly exciting to see about what were some early deployments of renewable energy, quite a bit on the western part of the U.S. is some of the leading development opportunities there. And so our panel today, we have Professor Joe Moore from the University of Utah, Tim Latimer, CEO of Fervo, Mike Eros, who's Chief Geoscientist at Sage Geosystems, and John McLennan, also of the University of Utah. And they'll be teeing up their response to my question of how do they get started in this field, a little bit more of the details about them. Just a few pieces of data on geothermal. So looking again, going back to some of the IEA reports on installed capacity and in renewables. And again, you see the steps, the stated policies, the pledges, APS, and then the net zero emissions type profiles that the IEA and others are looking at, and where solar PV, wind, and other renewables are playing. Geothermal is usually appearing in the other renewables, and you really have to dive into that to see how much is taking place. And as we discussed in the hydrogen part of the rollout, there are a lot of different scenarios in terms of really how deeply the world is going after decarbonization in terms of how much penetration there will be in that space. And so I really had to dive into the appendix of the latest IEA report of the World Energy Outlook of 2024 to find the geothermal numbers in there underpinning those graphs. And they are pretty small, so they've been ticking up, but you can see that in general geothermal is on the lower side in terms of the penetration to date in terms of renewable sector contributions to decarbonization. Now I'm also doing direct air capture work for Shell, the DOE, and projects there, and so it's pretty exciting to see some of the integrations of geothermal with direct air capture, namely what's happening with Climeworks in Iceland. So you've got this wonderful combination of basalt formation where you can actually just capture the CO2 in water, and you've got enough water you can pump it under the ground, and the basalt is taking it up very quickly, much faster than the studies were indicating. And you've got a geothermal plant that's actually powering that. And so you see some really exciting developments. That may be the only place in the world where that combination is happening. I'll be asking the panel about that. But the integrations are really exciting to see of where the opportunities can be in terms of the use of geothermal as 24/7 power. And then the DOE is talking about advanced geothermal. And so I think that's the first time I've done a presentation with only 8 slides, but I'm going to stop here and then go to our first contestant, which will be Professor Joe Moore from the University of Utah, and be speaking on how did you get started in geothermal, and then tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're working on today.
Absolutely, happy to do it. So I've got a few more days than you do, Joe. I started in the mid-'70s and in geothermal geothermal and have been active since then, primarily on conventional geothermal systems, those that are currently being produced today, and then moved on to EGS, enhanced geothermal systems. I got involved, I worked for a short stint at the uranium company, Anaconda Uranium Company, and we were looking at hydrothermal uranium deposits, those deposits that were effectively geothermal systems. And at about that time, in the early to mid-70s, DOE started to take an interest in geothermal. They were thinking about how do hydrothermal systems work, and I left Anaconda and joined EGI, where I still am. My background is in geology from Penn State University. It was a great place to be, and I really enjoyed that. But lately we've been working on FORGE, Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy. I serve as the project manager of that project, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
And you passed that test, so you go ahead and you get to go ahead and show your work now. So
Oh,
go ahead,
nice
Joe.
slides. Is that how it works? It's great. All right. This is John's slides.
Go ahead.
I can talk about them.
Okay, well, let's, John, why don't you tell us about yourself and how you got started in geothermal?
It'd be appropriate if Joe went first, but
You did go first, so, but yeah, we'll go over to John now.
We'll change the slides
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
you know, 3 days does qualify you as an expert these days.
I'm glad to hear that.
And my background started with my PhD thesis, which was sponsored by Los Alamos Scientific Lab back then, to do research related to fracture mechanics at Fenton Hill, which was a pioneering hot dry rock project. And then after a career in oil and gas and the last 15 years at the University of Utah, I've been lucky enough to ride on Joe Moore's coattails and get back into the geothermal business, particularly on the FORGE project.
All right, and you have again passed the test, and let's go ahead, and I think you're going to be able to show your slides, so let's try that out here. And are these your slides then?
No, these are mine, but
Okay, no, go ahead. No, go ahead. And we'll continue on, and we've got a plan here.
I don't think we do, but so it would have been ideal if Joe could have introduced the FORGE site.
Okay, well, let's try that. We'll toggle through the slides. And,
So thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
and show me when, are these your slides, Joe? Show me when you're,
Keep going. Keep going. You're getting there.
that's going to be Mike.
Yeah. Keep
Okay.
going. Doing great. Doing great.
Next steps, reception networking. All right. So I think we've got Sage in there. And
John in
Furbo, we
there.
had the link that we needed to show. No, we're looking for the other set of,
Yeah, put them in the box. I mean, up there.
okay,
They were called more.
yeah. And so let's go ahead with
Those are close.
John. And we're just going to have to continue with the Plan B, and let me find the other slides to get going forward then. So I'll leave that with you for now. And
Good luck.
always the Plan B.
So, well, thanks for having me back. So Joe will tell you later on about the FORGE project. But the basis of the FORGE project, it's a Department of Energy sponsored field laboratory where wells are interconnected by hydraulic fracturing, so that you have an injection well and a production well interconnected by hydraulic fracturing to form a heat exchange network in situ. That's opposed to conventional geothermal, which is basically you're drilling a well till you find a fracture, till you find fluid that is produced at a hot enough temperature. And so just in terms of this, Joe was going to tell you about that, and he will. Well, I think he will.
Yeah, I will.
But you know, the message here is that we see a lot of excitement about geothermal today. And I just want to walk through the life cycle of a geothermal project and talk about ways that we can maintain this momentum. The truth is, the way we maintain the momentum is the success of these folks and their companies. But there are some technical issues that will help us maintain the momentum. And the first is with continued exploration. And one of the things about enhanced geothermal systems is that you don't necessarily need to be beside a plate boundary. That basically you can drill till you find adequate heat, then you can create your own reservoir. And so that's the nice thing about an enhanced geothermal system. So you might ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, where Forge is. It is probably one of the premier enhanced geothermal systems reservoirs in the world. So is it a unicorn? Is this just a delightful anomaly? And can we progressively have an eastward expansion of enhanced geothermal systems? Is that legitimately reasonable? And southward, too, I might add. And so one of the ways to do that is by continuing to develop improved exploration technologies. And I was glad to see the talk this morning by Young Kai that 3D seismic is going to be particularly important. One of the troubles that we particularly run into is the lack of impedance contrast in some of these granitic reservoirs. And so anything, as he talked about, for example, AI or whatever technologies that can improve the resolution for determining faults is going to help that. Because the thing that is going to restrict the use of this in urban areas is potentially seismic hazards. And identifying those is particularly important. The second is continuing to upgrade methods for geothermal exploration in general. That it's not my specialty, but it seems like magnetotellurics and those technologies are great, but they don't give you necessarily the resolution that is required to make intelligent financial decisions. The third thing is moving eastward and southward. We have the opportunity of looking at so many penetrations from the oil and gas industry. So I think back analysis of that is really going to help out. And finally, water, no matter where we are, is going to be an issue. So understanding the availability of water is going to be important. So then the next thing down the line is you have to drill these wells. And drilling technologies has dramatically improved with the introduction of polycrystalline diamond compact bits to the geothermal industry. Yes, that sounds surprising to people from the oil and gas industry, that the geothermal industry has been using roller cone bits for a substantial period of time. But there's been a lot of progress recently, and I think maybe Tim, are you going to talk about it? You'll hear a real success story on drilling technology, at least in these relatively homogeneous reservoirs. Where more trouble has been encountered with PDC bits has been situations with interfacial severity. And same in the oil and gas business, where you're going from one formation to another, or you're hitting some sort of a natural fracture. And I think research needs to continue on that, as it does in terms of increasing the applicability for use in higher and higher temperature environments. Ruggedized RSS, rotary steerable systems. I'm not sure you need them, but it's something that's potentially useful. The other thing, and I was particularly interested in the presentation from Dr. Shrivasam this morning, is that I think a real opportunity is using the bit as a laboratory. I think we are on exactly the same page on that particular category. Is that taking the signals that you can measure from sensors at the bit or just raw bit performance in general and making inference about the mechanical properties of the rock, the characteristics of the reservoir, is absolutely a logical next step for the oil and gas and the petroleum industries in general. And so that was a very nice coincidence with his talk this morning. The next step, so you can drill these, and the next step is appropriate reservoir characterization. And one of the things that we found on the Forge project, and I think folks have found it on other commercial projects, is fiber optics, just like in the oil and gas industry, has been very, very helpful to us. We have found, we've managed to ruggedize these so that they lasted for at least a year, and they provided outstanding information, and I think continue efforts to ruggedize these and deploy them economically and flexibly is going to be something that we're going to be looking at in the geothermal industry in general. The next thing is understanding fracture growth. And we do it normally by monitoring microseismicity, but any sort of methodology to do that cheaply, at least on pilot projects, is going to be particularly appropriate. We have found, in terms of geophone technology, that 150 degrees C, I think Joe can vouch for that, is about the limit where we can keep geophones in the hole for extended periods of time. And then the final thing is a chicken and egg. Okay, we want to extend the thermal characteristics of logging technologies, but we have to establish that there's a market for those before it's going to be substantial. It's going to substantially happen. And so it looks like the market is coming. It's exciting, and so we're waiting for the service companies to roll out those new tools. Cementing and casing, I think, remains a bit of an issue. We've had difficulties at Forge in terms of cementing, and I think that continuing to look at it, particularly if we go, as we go, that is, above 200 C, that we're going to have more and more difficulties with cementing, and maybe we're going to have to really think about cementing to avoid casing failures because of the amount of hydraulic fracturing that is really required in these particular wells. And in terms of hydraulic fracturing, well, we could spend a whole session on this, but I think one of the things that intrigues me is at Forge, we put one well immediately above another. And that may not have been the best choice. Initially, we were basing it on buoyancy and the movement of fluids. But probably, I think some of the technologies that Fervo has adopted, where there's a lateral displacement as well as a vertical displacement between the injector and the producer, is going to get better heat efficiency. And so I think that there's a lot of room for people studying this, along with studying the actual materials. I'm convinced from our recent experience that proppant is required in these wells to guarantee conductivity. What we don't at the present time know is how long sand as a proppant is going to hold up in these high temperature aqueous environments. Maybe it's not going to be too much of a problem once the fluids are equilibrated in a continuous loop, but I think we're waiting to see a little bit whether or not proppant, more sophisticated proppant may be required. And we're hoping that that's not the case because of additional expense. To carry that proppant, we probably have to go back to chemistry with fracturing fluids. At least that's my opinion. That if you want to carry these proppants higher up and have them remain suspended, we may need to be using viscosified fluids, and we may need to be looking at agents that hinder settling in terms of these proppants so that they don't fall out. The work that Resman did for us substantiated that a lot of our proppant probably settled out, and we pumped both slick water and cross-linked carboxymethyl hydroxypropyl guar in different stages. And so maintaining that proppant and having some form of hindered settling may be an appropriate consideration. The other thing that worries us at Forge are some of our parasitic losses. We carried out a really successful circulation test back in August and September, and we found that the temperatures were constant and stayed up for 30 days. Constant, stayed up at about 385 degrees Fahrenheit, but we had to pump at about 2,900 psi. And the parasitic losses for doing that at a long period of time are not probably not economically successful. They may not kill a project, but we'd like to reduce them. Then ultimately, this is truthfully one of the more interesting findings from Forge. And maybe if I'll just spend a little time on it, because the debate in geothermal, as opposed to petroleum, is whether or not natural fractures really matter. We've seen a lot of the work from the HFTS projects where it suggests that fractures are relatively planar and don't interact, and that natural fractures don't necessarily play a substantial role. However, this is our injector, and you can see a dot with each one of our clusters that we used. And this is the producer, and we had fiber optics in the producer, and we monitored the hits. And what we noticed is that stage 3, 4, and 5 all came out at the same place. Stage 6 was like this. Stage 7 came out like this. Stage 8 spanned about 400 feet, and stages 9 and 10 occupied the same production zone as the end of stage 8. So it strongly suggests, at least in our case, in this particular situation, that natural fractures do play a role in these, and that there are corridors, just as has been found elsewhere in the oil and gas business. Tim may want to say more about this because they may have slightly different experience. But ours is that we see these natural fractures exist, and we need to deal with them. I'm also convinced that you have to frack both the injector and the producer in these cases. I think that's almost essential to do that. And so the really important thing coming out of this is the ability to forecast thermal resilience over the long term. And I'd like to come up with tests where we can use AI and machine learning and other technologies so we don't have to inject for a year to figure out whether or not we're going to have thermal depletion. So that's a challenge. And then the final area is topsides. I don't know much about topsides, but I won't let that stop me. So I think one of the things that we want to consider is cascading use of power, is combined heating and electricity generation in terms of geothermal in general. Hybridization is absolutely essential. I think that that's the key. Geothermal can provide the supporting power to solar and wind at night. And I think that there are huge, huge applications for that. As long as we can get through some of the permitting and financing challenges that are associated with those activities. Reduction in parasitic loads, as I mentioned, new refrigerants. Water usage is going to be a big deal, particularly in the western United States, because we'll lose some, and so we may have to deal with them. And we also have to anticipate that there are going to be chemical treatments that are likely required for corrosion and for carbonate inhibition, scaling inhibition. And then finally, a couple of things that have made this happen and will drive it forward and will maintain the momentum. And the first that has helped this seriously is your federal government has been at work for you. And actually, this has been a very, very useful exercise and expenditure of federal money to establish the feasibility of enhanced geothermal systems. And the second thing is the success of companies like Sage and Fervo, because nothing will drive this and maintain the momentum more than their success. And so we're no pressure, guys. Anyways, just want to acknowledge the Department of Energy, and you'll be able to hear what Forge is about when we find Joe's slides.
And we're there, so thank you so much,
okay,
John.
Thank you.
I'm thinking this mic is working, and so now keep all of that in mind. And I think, Joe, you're going to paint a picture about how we got there. So I'll let you take it off as part A now.
I'm certainly going to try.
There's a slide advancer. And look and behold.
Look at that. Yeah, that's
familiar.
familiar.
Very familiar. Okay.
Wow. Well, I hope we've been entertained at this point. It's going to be hard to fill in what John left out. But this is obviously Utah Forge, Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy. I'm sorry, is the mic not on?
No, but hold it up to you.
Oh, is that working better? All right. Thank you. Okay. So just to back up a little bit, U.S. currently produces about 3,900 megawatts of electricity from geothermal systems. Tiny, tiny amount, 0.04% or so. We'll hear more about that. But virtually all of this electricity is coming from hot springs. Okay? Around the world, 16 gigawatts around the world. And really, if you look at what DOE's goal, and these are DOE's goals for Earthshot 4, which I think gave everybody a kick in the pants to move forward. The Secretary 2 years ago announced 60,000 megawatts of geothermal energy by 2050 and reducing the cost of EGS by 90% to $45. You're going to do that, aren't you? You're going to drop the cost? Yeah, good, good. We can drill cheaper, that's for sure. Jeff Tester, a couple of years ago, in 2006, in fact, came out with the conclusion that tapping 2% of the energy between 2 and 6 miles would provide more than 2,000 times their yearly U.S. usage. Okay, and this let people know that you can produce geothermal energy east of the Mississippi. And in this plot I've taken at 4 miles, we'll put electric generation about 150 C. Okay, that works. And a lot of the new systems are at that. But basically take away that the heat's inexhaustible. Okay? So I'm not going to talk much about the geology. The geology is very well defined at Utah Forge in the neighboring mountain ranges. Sorry, there's no pointer. We see this nice lime green and red and magenta rocks. Those are 28 to 11 million year old granites, and they extend under the Forge site, and they extend further to the west at about 25 degrees below the Fervo, below Tim's site. So we understand these rocks quite well. You can see here that what the Forge site looks like. To the east, where it says thermal ground, that's an active geothermal system. It's been producing since 1984. So long-term, 36 megawatts, called Blundell plant. To the west of us and north are 168 windmills. To the west of that is solar fields. So this is part of Utah's renewable energy corridor, and that's an important component. Let's move forward. The concept behind Utah Forge was really to build a field-scale national laboratory for de-risking tools and technologies for enhanced geothermal systems. And when we went into this, it was really hydrofracking. Okay, that was the concept. It was not advanced geothermal systems at that point. It was just crack the rocks, push water through, and make electricity. So our job was to develop the techniques for that. We've drilled 8 wells, 7 of them are shown here. There's a water well that isn't shown. You can see the depths, and on the right, the temperatures. Highest temperature has been about 240 degrees C at 9,500 feet. And that's well 78B32. Okay? Point out that 56, 58, 68, 78 A and B, those are vertical wells. Those are really used for monitoring. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Wells A and B are directionally drilled, and that's our production injection pair. As John said, A is the deeper of the two, and it's both wells are deviated. We drilled 4,000 to 5,000 feet, 65-degree deviation from vertical, and you can see the dash line as the tracks of the lateral. Okay? The B well, the production well, is about 300 feet, 100 meters vertically above the injection well. In the spring and fall, we did stimulation and circulation tests. John alludes to some of this. I'll come back to it. And that was important. It was a commercial level project, commercial level circulation test. We injected 13 barrels or so an hour. We recovered about 90% recovery at a temperature of about 193 C. So commercial results, commercial scale test. Very, very successful. And we'll hear more about these tests, I think, in a little while. Okay? So with that in mind, we use two different methods to monitor. And I think both of these methods pushed the methods further, and they yielded really unanticipated results. So the first was the seismic data that we collected. This was data from the stimulation. There were 10 stages with a maximum of eight clusters. Stages 1 through 10, they start at the toe and work their way up. One of the unanticipated results is, as you can see on the right, and what looks like a structure, a crescent-shaped structure. And on the right-hand side, two wells, this is looking down on the two wells, that trajectory of that structure follows sigma H max. On the other side of the two wells, it's more northerly. That's probably a natural fracture that's taking some of the fluid. The black dots and the orange dots are magnitudes. Orange is greater than 0.6. The black is greater than 1, and the maximum magnitude is about 2.3. We have a very strict traffic light system here that tells us what to do if we exceed both 2s and 3s. I don't know if I can get the left hand to work. I'll give it a try. Oh, there we go. So we'll see these stages being populated with the seismic events with time. We'll just watch what happens. So these were the early stages. Now we're seeing some of the later stages. Maximum magnitudes are occurring on the margins of these seismic fields. There's our, so we just watch this and see what it looks like. We're seeing about equal height versus depth, which is, guess what we hope for here. And so this will move on for just a minute, and then we'll move on. Okay? Get some idea what this looks like in 3D. Okay. Okay. The second thing that John mentioned was deployment of optical fibers. 3 different fibers were deployed in our production well. One was a flat pack, UT Austin, and the second was a Silixa packed by Rice University. And the third one was just a pressure temperature gauge. So we had in both of the optic fibers that I mentioned, Silixa and the flat pack, we had DTS, so we had multi-mode and single-mode fibers. We were monitoring distributed temperature, strain, and DAS, seismic acoustics. And in the third one, that was a gauge that went to the heel of the well, and that was just for temperature and pressure. So here you can see a plot of strain change rate, and we don't spend much time at this right now, but if we look at stage 8, and John mentioned that stage 8, 9, and 10 coalesced, right? What we see is that the uppermost frac hit, which is to the left, so the y-axis is in depth, the x-axis is in time. So if we look at the earliest time, we see that stage 8 was fracked at the shallowest depth. And then with time, the fracks move down, not at all expected. As John showed you also, what we saw was that the fracks were oblique to the wells. We expected hydraulic fracturing, that the fracks would grow perpendicular to the wells. I didn't do that, suggesting that DFN, natural fractures, played a role in controlling fluid flow between the two wells. So all of the data we've collected is in the public domain. I think this is unusual for any company, oil, gas, or geothermal. All of this is available. This is all of the seismic data, all of the pressure data, temperature data, well data, drilling data. It's all available to you. Go to GDR, Geothermal Data Repository. It's free. You can access it. If you can't find it, call me, because sometimes it's a little difficult to extract that data. But there's a lot of it there, and we hope you'll use it. So, left it open to questions later.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for Plan A, backfilling here. And let's see what's up next for us here. Roll the dice. And Mike, tell us about how you got into geothermal, and tell us about yourself. And then if you pass that test, we'll go on to the slide deck.
Great, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And in particular, I want to express the gratitude also of Cindy Taff, my boss. She's the CEO of Sage Geosystems. She unfortunately had a family incident happen and she couldn't make it unexpectedly today. So I'm going to pinch hit for her with this illustrious panel. I also just want to say it's a pleasure to be at the University of Houston. The chief modeler on our team is a Cougar. All the mathematicians on our team are from the University of Houston. So big respect to that team there. Also, as a Houston-based startup, we build on the shoulders of the innovators like Fervo who've been doing this much longer than us. And so today I'm going to give you a taste of what we're doing, hopefully explain a little bit more about our technology, pique your interest, and give you more to think about. I'm a geologist. My background, University of California at Davis. I grew up in West Virginia. I ended up working for ExxonMobil for 12 years, technical team lead for U.S. assets. I developed an interest in geothermal during my time at ExxonMobil, and kind of discovered from that corporate perspective what the risk profile tolerance was for things like geothermal, and attended actually Pivot 2020, the first conference that Jamie Beard hosted and got folks interested from the oil and gas industry into learning more about geothermal. Had the opportunity to meet Lev Ring, the founder of Sage, co-founder with Lance Cook and Cindy Taff. And they made an opportunity for me to come and test their technologies in the subsurface. But I'm a geologist by background. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective on two business lines that we're pursuing in particular. Underground energy storage, subsurface energy storage, and geothermal power. This is too small to read, but essentially, as I mentioned, these two business lines, we have a bias towards testing things in the field. We've raised more than $50 million since 2020. We've spent probably 30. We have a long way to go. We're trying to raise a lot more. We recently signed an agreement with Meta to provide 150 megawatts of power by 2027. That's kind of the far end of this graph on the right. But you can see in the middle these boxes which signify how we re-entered a well in Starr County, which is near the Mexican border, that Shell had drilled in 2008, large casing. We're innovating around completion styles at the same time that we're trying to innovate around surface plant equipment, because as John mentioned, the surface side and the subsurface side really are necessary to make more efficient, to make this whole system work better. So the technology readiness levels that we're approaching are between 7, I'd say 7 and 8. Towards the end of this talk, I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse of our first pilot built in the field, which is our energy storage facility in Atacosca County, just about an hour south of San Antonio. But just to, like, you can give that flavor, that's kind of where we're headed. So this is a slide kind of summarizing a little bit about how Sage fits into the ecosystem of enhanced geothermal systems. And also to mention just our next phase of development around that, which is going to be geothermal testing. So on the left, you see a little cartoon here, and this is on our website also in this cartoon fashion, with Sage showing 2 wells, one going down right next to the other. And essentially right next to that, you see an enhanced geothermal system, or EGS, which is kind of the more industry standard, the forage approach, where you go down one well, you connect to another well in the subsurface via fracturing. And then on the right, you see closed loop systems, which are another approach which is being tested. I just want to stress very few companies in the world, A, have raised the capital, B, have the people in the field to even begin to test these things. So I feel very privileged to kind of share some of the early results of that. And, building off of what we have, Fervo and Tim have done a lot more, and so we're all learning together kind of how this approach is going to work or not. But it's a very exciting time. On the right-hand side, you see an image here of about a 4-foot tall supercritical CO2 turbine. And this is an area of innovation that we're progressing with the Southwest Research Institute near San Antonio to make turbines more efficient, smaller scale, things that you could put on an airplane, honestly, and fly to Nigeria if you need to, and potentially offer you the ability to have a competitor with organic ranking cycle turbines from Turboden, et cetera. That's not yet at TRL 8, I will say, so bear with us as we continue to test that. We did a pressure test, though. We did a spin test at 20,000 RPM 2 months ago, so we have our design down. I'm very excited about that. But let me back up a little bit and just give you a view about what Sage is doing as a company. We are innovating around managing pressure in the subsurface. The founders of Sage, Levering, Lance Cook in particular, were instrumental in inventing something called managed pressure drilling and developing that at Shell and Weatherford in the early 2000s. That's something I encountered at ExxonMobil. We were drilling wells in the Gulf of Mexico, West Africa, Deepwater Guyana. It allows you to really dial in your pressure management, more than 10 to 20,000 feet subsurface within, say, 200 PSI, remotely from rigs. And so that's the technology that we are essentially working on. This is a very busy slide here, and I apologize, it's the most text I have on a slide, but I want to sit here for a little while and give you a little more background. So I mentioned, and it's on the upper right, this is the little cartoon view of Sage, 2 wells side by side, in this case vertically oriented. On the bottom left here, you see operations testing from 2022, 2023. We re-entered a vertical well, I mentioned about 11-inch casing. We constructed a dominantly vertically oriented fracture. Now, we connected about 3,000 feet of rock with a fracture vertically. This is something that in oil and gas terms we used to call blowing out the shoe or drilling overbalanced. And this is a technology that honestly, when I was working with BP in the Gulf of Mexico, we wanted to avoid because it would end up connecting your reservoirs where you didn't want it. But Lance had the idea to take this really and work with it in a different way, to create maybe T-shaped fractures or chevron-shaped or something with a vertical root to allow for greater connectivity to heat below, but also importantly for you to be able to basically open and close the fracture. Now, we didn't know this would work. This is something that we had modeled very extensively with physical models. I mentioned Doug Simpkins, our mathematician on the team. He had brought this up, and actually there's a paper here, I note here, Simpkins and all, 2023, if you want to read more about that. We tested this in the field. So what you're seeing here on the graph on the right is pressure through time in a black line, and essentially showing how we were able to initiate fractures at greater than fracture initiation pressure, and then dilate them, but not to go to runaway propagation fracture pressures. And so that gave us an operation window of maybe 200, 300 PSI, which we then cycled repeatedly. And so we did flow in, flow out testing. We didn't know this would be the best way to run this. Honestly, we tried perfs that were shallower, perfs that were deeper, connecting, circulating, trying to go up versus down. We ended up settling on a huff and puff style approach, which is a term some folks may have seen from heavy oil industry approaches. Essentially, putting the well flush with the fracture system full of water and then pulling the water back out of the same well. So this is kind of the heart of the geopressure geothermal system that I'm talking about, is that we don't rely on subsurface communication between wells. We're trying to cut costs wherever we can. We're trying to make the wells more efficient by doing this. And what we're doing with the pressure space with these, you can see the rise and fall, is essentially opening and closing these fractures. There is some precedent for this in natural hydrothermal systems, which over thousands of years encounter similar pressurization, depressurization cycling. And so far, we haven't seen things like crippling fines migration. Now, we've only done 2 years of testing. This is an area of really rapidly developing interest for us. And this is also what we will be approaching in our field testing next with the U.S. Air Force. In Starr County, again, we'll be reentering our well. We recently received funds from them to test that with the idea that we will then make geothermal power with an organic ranking cycle that we rent at the surface, and then prove that we can do this approach, as John mentioned, in areas that are not just in the Rockies or the Great Basin. That's our next approach here. So just a little bit, though, about this is that by cycling water to the surface and back, we're essentially, hopefully, driving greater efficiencies and the system as a whole, lower cost, and then also by managing pressure in this way, we're creating more of a zero voidage system where we're not losing water to the formation uncontrollably. In our tests so far, we've seen about 2% water loss, and we need to maintain that for a lot of reasons. License to operate is a big one. We need to stay away from the pressurization risk profiles associated with induced seismicity, for example, and that's something that we work very closely with the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology to monitor. They do a third-party independent validation of our technologies in terms of not inducing seismicity. So happy to answer more questions about this, but I just want to give that overall view of what a geopressure geothermal system is and where we're headed to test it. On our way to our approach with geothermal, and after constructing these majorly gravity-oriented vertical fractures, we found that actually we had a battery, effectively, for energy storage in the subsurface. We found we have about 70% round-trip efficiency for taking grid power, which could be wind, could be solar, and using that, compressing it, putting water underground in our large fractures, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of barrels, and then holding it for, let's say, more than 4 hours, which is about the economic limit of most lithium-ion batteries today. After that, they become less efficient. And then we enter the sweet spot of long-duration energy storage. Earlier today, folks talked about meeting energy demand where it is. That's a really big deal. There's folks who put out papers really effectively showing that geothermal subsurface pressure energy storage can help bridge the gap, really, for nighttime and shoulder time energy production. So the grid is intermittent, as you know. Solar and wind are intermittent. If we can approach a sweet spot of 8 to 16-hour long-duration energy storage, now we have a way to make those 24/7. So that's what we're doing. In particular now, thanks to funding from Expand Energy, we raised another capital round with them in April, formerly Chesapeake. We are now building a 3-megawatt commercial facility on the San Miguel Electrical Co-op land, which is a coal-powered, actually coal mine also, power plant near just an hour south of San Antonio. And their goal is to replace that entire plant, which is about 400 megawatt capacity, with solar power in the next 10 to 20 years. But as I mentioned, the price of batteries is a very big concern for them. And so they want to test our technology as a way to more efficiently scale to store energy for the hundreds of megawatts capacity. So I mentioned about 75% round trip efficiency, maybe 3 to 5 megawatts energy production per well. And so that's really a lightning round of what we're doing. I want to acknowledge all of the partners and collaborators. I mentioned a few. We work closely with a number of different branches of the U.S. military. We're testing at 3 different bases for feasibility studies in the United States and Texas in particular. We're kind of an interesting company funded by climate change philanthropists who want to bring zero carbon solutions to the world, Viria, but also Neighbors Drilling, who want to see less boom-bust cycling in the oil and gas industry, drilling, and make a more sustainable future for drilling and drilling employees in Texas and the world. So very excited to hear more from you guys and also hear from Tim.
All righty, well, super, Mike. So, and last but not least, Tim Latimer. We've heard, Tim, that the industry is standing on your shoulders as CEO of Fervo, and also let's roll the dice here about seeing the slide opportunities. You actually have a cloud-based presentation, and so we're getting some direct help in getting that one launched, I believe. And it's a great slideshow. But yeah, again, start with, how did you get into your journey into the space? And then tell us how you got to that point of being a leader in the field with Fervo.
Sure.
So you can go ahead and get started, and,
Yeah.
and we will bring up here we are, look at this, lo and behold.
Yay, slides. All right. Well, first, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and it's great to be at the University of Houston. I live like less than a mile away from campus, so this is quite close to home to me, and we're very proud to be headquartered here in Houston, Texas. And it's great to be on this panel with Mike, a fellow entrepreneur navigating in this space, and the University of Utah, our esteemed colleagues there who we've been collaborating with for many, many years now on this. So it's wonderful to be here. I got my start in geothermal, I guess fairly consistent theme across the panel, because I was drilling wells for oil and gas first and then got excited about geothermal. In particular, my first job was a drilling engineer for BHP out of college. I was working in the Eagle Ford right when the shale boom was taking off, and the Eagle Ford is a little higher temperature than some of the other onshore basins, and so my first assignment period as an industry was to figure out our motors were failing, our MWD was failing and we thought it was temperature related. So I was sent off to research high temperature drilling solutions. I found the same exact paper actually that Joe just mentioned, the Jeff Tester report on the future of geothermal, and that came out in 2006 and through that research in high temperature drilling. And that paper basically outlined that there was an unlimited amount of geothermal out there, but only if we overcame some technical challenges to make it cost effective. And that was principally lower cost drilling and then getting higher flow rates out of low permeability formations. And I thought it was just the absolute most obvious idea ever that if horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing was able to accomplish that for first gas and then oil, that geothermal would be the next revolution there. And I think it is truly a revolution. And it's interesting to start this talk with IEA forecasts of what geothermal will look like in the future, because I'll say, hopefully somewhat confidently, that those are going to way, way underestimate how much geothermal we will build across the globe over the next couple decades. And I do think it's important to share that parallel with the oil and gas industry and the experience with shale, to do a different three-letter acronym agency and look at EIA forecasts. I remember when I started my career in oil and gas, the EIA was still forecasting that the U.S. was destined to become the largest importer of natural gas in the world. And here we are 15 years later as the largest exporter of natural gas in the world. And it was because horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing unlocked an energy revolution, and I think we're in the same spot here, where all the three-letter agencies are going to come up with new forecasts as they see the things that people on this panel are doing to drive costs down. So that's how I got here. Moving forward, a little bit about Fervo. So first off, something I think will resonate well in this city, in this room, our mission is to leverage geoscience to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. As a drilling engineer myself, I thought that people were really overlooking all the contributions that the geosciences could make to the energy transition, and that at the end of the day is why we're in business at Fervo. We think the world needs to move to more sustainable energy, and the geosciences are going to be the backbone of making that happen. We also like to talk a lot about our core values. I won't dwell on these too long other than talk about innovation through collaboration. We are always excited to share our data in symposiums like this. And it's also, I must always highlight the Utah Forge project. This has been what I hope will continue to be successful, and we'll look at back on this as one of the most successful public-private partnerships of all time of getting a new technology to market. We couldn't do what we do at Fervo had it not been for the years of collaboration we have with the Utah Forge team. So always want to make that acknowledgement. And what is it that we do? It's pretty straightforward, and for a room of industry experts like this, I don't need to get into it too much, and you've already seen a lot of it. Almost all geothermal projects drilled over the last 60 years since the first power plant came online have been vertical wells, unstimulated, and you just hope you find fractures. Fervo focused on drilling horizontal wells and doing a multi-stage hydraulic fracturing process. Easy to show on one slide, hard to implement in practice for all the technological challenges that you've already heard about today. But we turned that slide into a real project. So in 2021, we partnered with Google as part of their 24/7 carbon-free energy initiative, and they became our first ever customer for our pilot project that we did in Nevada. I'll point out, since we've already talked about fiber optics a lot today, we had fiber optics on all 4 of these wells. We did a isolated 4-stage, 10-cluster hydraulic fracturing treatment in the proof of concept well in 2020. It met most of our technical objectives in terms of breakdown pressure, fracture geometry, cluster efficiency, and it really gave us confidence to raise another round of capital, move forward with Google, and drill the next 3 wells you have there: a vertical monitoring well, again instrumented with fiber optics, and a horizontal injection well, and a horizontal production well. On October 30th of 2023, so almost exactly 1 year ago today, we brought this project online. The first ever horizontal commercial enhanced geothermal systems project. This project has been producing roughly 3 megawatts of electricity and has been doing so for 12 months. And we'll be able to say a full year next Wednesday. And one thing we'll point out from a temperature standpoint, because this is one of the major research questions of enhanced geothermal systems, we have observed no thermal decline in this project at all, even though it's been producing power for 12 months, which is something that I can tell you the first independent engineer report we got after we commissioned our well test said that we would experience, their word is exactly, catastrophic thermal breakthrough in 17 days. And we're now, 350 days past that with no thermal decline, which I think speaks to a little bit how radically different this approach to enhanced geothermal systems is compared to the conventional geothermal industry, where it's an entirely different paradigm of reservoir management than what a lot of people are used to. So that's our pilot project that we completed last year. And we've moved forward with Project Cape. And speaking of the public-private partnership, in all of the photos you'll see of Project Cape, you can see the Forge site and vice versa, because they are literally next door to each other. We saw the great drilling results that this Forge team produced in 2018, finding a very high temperature reservoir, what we thought was the great test bed to move forward enhanced geothermal systems, and we decided to move in and develop it as a private sector partner to try to do a commercial project to build off the research results that Utah Forge was pioneering. And so we're well on our way now. It's a 400 megawatt project. We have fully contracted that to utility customers in California, as well as to Google, who continues to be one of our largest customers. And we are moving forward with this project. We have actually drilled 15 wells there to date, and I'll show some data on that on the next slide. And we are actually broke ground just 2 months ago on the power plant. So we're building 3 36 megawatt turbines out there for phase 1 of that project, and we'll begin producing electricity that we sell to the grid there in 2026. So in terms of infrastructure project timelines, it is literally right around the corner, and it's quite exciting for me to be out there to see drilling crews, completions crews, as well as all of our civil works and plant construction going on all at once out there. It's quite a cool sight to see. And this was the big result that we produced in August of this year. So I mentioned our pilot project in Nevada is producing roughly 3 megawatts. We wanted to go deeper, hotter, bigger diameter wells, longer laterals. We actually conducted our first well test at the Project Cape site, which I'm showing videos here, in July and August of this year, and we achieved a peak electricity production equivalent of over 10 megawatts there. So just in the span of one project to the next, through longer laterals, better completions methods, doing higher temperature geology, we have tripled the productivity of from our first well system to our second well system. And we don't think we have come close to exhausting the potential upside for driving even more efficient wells. But I can tell you, we'll get into the project economics in a second, producing 10 megawatts of electricity from a single production well starts getting you to the point of making very economically attractive projects. So we're well on our way there. By the way, a note, we were doing this well testing at the same time as the Utah Forge, so it was pretty cool to be out there. You could stand on our pad, look at our steam, turn around and look at the Utah Forge steam, and just it was amazing to think about all of the exciting things for the future of the global energy system that were happening right in this valley in Utah. So really cool to be out there. So cost, this is what's held geothermal back for forever. And I'll show it on the next slide, but people believe that enhanced geothermal systems would be cost prohibitive. To get drilling costs down, you have to drill faster. So When we first started drilling our well at Project Red, our first project, it took us 75 days to drill our first deep horizontal well. It's a very high temperature reservoir. You're drilling through granite. You have to deal with all of the issues that come with that, and it's a larger hole size than most onshore oil and gas projects. And so we were excited to even get it done because people said you wouldn't be able to drill a horizontal well in those conditions, but it was not something that was cost effective, 75 days. By the time we drilled our second well there, we dropped it to 58 days. And I can tell you we've now progressed, and our most recent well that we finished drilling at the Project Cape site was completed in just 17 days. And that's despite the fact that it is over 4,000 feet more measured depth than the well we did at Project Red. So whenever you turn it into a cost per foot basis, which is because it all comes down to the cost, we've dropped our costs from the first ever well we drilled, where we were around over $1,000 per foot of drilling, to now we are down in the $350 per foot mark. And so we have not only tripled our productivity from project to project, but we've slashed our drilling costs by over 70%. And that's led to a pretty dramatic change in cost. So this was already talked about, the commercial liftoff report and the ambitious goals that the Department of Energy has set. We've taken a chart that they put in their liftoff report and broke down costs on a $1 per kW basis for what enhanced geothermal systems could do. And the 2021 baseline that NREL had for what a deep enhanced geothermal system project should cost, they said it should cost about $27,000 per kilowatt. And I know not everybody here is probably a power plant cost engineer, so I'll just tell you, no one will ever buy power from you if that's your capital cost. And if you want to know why people weren't paying attention to geothermal, it's because the general consensus was that it would cost that much. Now, we published our data from Project Red in 2023, and the DOE updated their forecast basically to say that the cost structure was about half from those anticipated values before. And I noticed the lines are a little off, so before I do my big reveal on the next one, I'll caveat, I don't know where the little white box will show up because it seems to be off kilter. But when we look at our project costs for Project Cape, the project we're doing in Utah, and we look at the ambitious 2030 goal that the DOE said was an incredibly ambitious target, we are coming in, it's not below. It's actually right at that line. I think the formatting got messed up a little bit, but their goal for 2030 was to hit a $5,000 per kilowatt cost structure, and we are hitting that number as we speak on our project today. And if we've talked today about the theme of AI and power demand and the pressure to decarbonize and what that's doing to power markets, I can tell you there is an unlimited amount of demand for power at that price point, which is why you're seeing our business and the whole industry of geothermal really take off. And I think that ambitious 2035 target, I think we're going to end up getting it before 2035. We do this with a lot of partners. I won't go through all of these, but much like what Mike said, it's a combination of people who are deeply passionate about climate and people who are great at drilling wells and the geology and the geosciences. And again, I'll put a plug there for the Department of Energy support and the Utah Forge support. And just one last thing on where this industry is going. This theme of reliable, affordable, clean electricity and the drive for new reliability and the drive for meeting demand sources from AI and other things is creating a huge market. And we've now executed power purchase agreements that are valued over $5.7 billion in terms of binding contracted lifetime revenue from our projects, and we're just getting started. So the future of geothermal is a massive, massive industry, and I think it is going to be, the surprise of the energy transition. And I think if we're in this room together 15 years from now, we'll be talking about how deeply misunderestimated that IEA report is, just like we can talk about how everybody missed the revolution from shale oil and gas. And that's how we see the future. So thank you for that, and excited to continue this conversation with the panelists.
All righty, well, thank you very much, Tim. Let's see, somebody's missing a microphone here, so, and I've got the podium, so that answered my first question going in 3 days on the job. It's a revolution, so, and it's all about the drilling at the end of the day. So I guess the issue are similar to what was happening with the hydraulic fracturing and the shale gas revolution. What do you see as the risks here? So we see opportunity out in front of us, but where do you see the risks that you really have to maneuver in order to make this revolution happen? And Tim, I may just start with you since your mic is warm there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's still not a foregone conclusion that this is going to be as revolutionary as it should be. I would say first and foremost is not a technical risk, but actually a financial one. If you look collectively between the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act that were both passed in 2022, it put tens of billions of dollars into new energy technologies. 10 billion new amounts of DOE funding for nuclear, 9 billion for carbon capture, like 8 billion for hydrogen. In total, the geothermal industry got $84 million between those bills. And so we're trying to compete in a marketplace often with projects that, there are individual nuclear projects, for example, that have gotten, for one project, more DOE funding than the entire industry of geothermal has in its existence. And so being at cost parity when there are such major disparities in public funding is a major risk. And I think that's one of the things that is happening. And I think it's related to a second point, which is we're in a unique moment in time in the power markets where the demand is here and the demand is now. And these data center companies want power to come online ASAP. And I think it's really about how can we get the exciting results that you've heard about on this panel today out into the public zeitgeist and talking about it so that we can attract the investment and put more wins on the board, because otherwise you're going to see this moment of demand move on to other sources if they don't think geothermal can be scalable enough. So I think those are the big risks is, can we attract the capital we need to move forward? Can we be competitive with other resources that get far more government funding? And can we move quick enough to keep the attention of the customers who are very, very hungry for power right now?
All righty. Anyone else want to take that particular question on the risk side?
So maybe from a technical risk, one of the things that I think is a little bit uncertain relates to conformance, okay, or the equivalent to conformance. The equivalent to conformance that we know in conventional reservoirs is that you have multiple hydraulic fractures, and if one of these fractures starts to cool off, how can you control flow into that fracture under extreme temperature conditions? I think the technologies are there. I think they can be applied, but I think that that's just something that's going to need to be addressed.
And what does that risk translate into in terms of impact?
Well, you want the worst case scenario? So as you start to inject colder fluid into fractures, if one or particular fracture starts to take fluid, then thermoelastic effects are going to happen, and the aperture of that fracture at the injector is going to increase. And progressively, that fracture is going to take more and more fluid, and it's almost catalytic. And so you ultimately may be cooling off your produced fluid.
Okay, so it's really an economic and technical risk. And so in terms of managing the induced seismicity risks, the history reports had some of the very early natural productions had some radioactivity and such. So what other types of public risks, would people worry about or basis previous discussions in this space that the public needs to be comfortable with, I guess is my question.
Well, let me address some of those questions, because they're critical questions. And I think what John mentioned, too, are opportunities at this point. Yeah, we're going to have circulation issues that we have to plug up, and it's a good opportunity to develop these tools. But as you mentioned, the biggest issue is seismic, at least in people's mind. Actually, in the West, the bigger issue is water usage. So we can address both of those. In terms of seismic, we've had some issues in some areas of the world, Pohang, Basel, Sulz, and we recognize them, and the DOE recognized them. When we started the Forge project, the first thing we did was an exploration program, and we used reflection seismic. And in fact, what we discovered was that the main basin and range faults are tilted. And based on the geometry, this was not an area that was likely to slip. So we looked at potential for induced seismicity very, very early on, and we concluded that the risk is relatively low. We think it's important to be absolutely transparent in everything that we do. So when we do something, we invite the local folks to come out. Forge has put computers in the 3 libraries and in the area, and the smallest town is 700 people. And those computers can pull up seismic data in real time. And so we make sure that the local townspeople know that we are going to do it. We are going to make some seismic events. They can come and watch, they can come and stand, or they can watch the computer in real time while we do this. And Tim has had some, we've had over 150,000 events. We have a very, very well-defined traffic light system. And if we exceed the limits on the traffic light system, we stop and we figure out what to do. And that may be to stop pumping, it may be to produce. But we have this outlined and it's available. So we recognize that we're going to have seismic events. The biggest we saw at this point was a mid-2. So not very high, certainly not sensible. And we've, you know, our goal is to figure out how to manage the stress field so we don't have large events. And then we constantly monitor. And it's difficult from the oil and gas industry. I don't think people really recognize that when you take these geophones and you put them down in temperature, they don't last. You know, 150 degrees C is a good temperature for many of these, and we're trying to get them deeper. At 180, we may get 4 days out of some. So we're working on new directions, fiber optic cables with 3-component geophones, higher temperature geophones. All are critical for monitoring, so at least we know what's going on. If we see something happening, then we can stop and take the correct approach. The second area, which in many of the western states is even more critical, is water usage. We're taking away, and we heard this, the first thing I heard from the townsfolk was, you're taking away my water. And the water that we are using, in fact, is non-potable. It contains chemicals that are potentially hazardous, and the state has concluded that this water cannot be used for human consumption. It can't be used for grazing. It can't be used for agriculture. And so we have to make it very, very clear that we're not taking something away and we're not adding risk to the local community. Again, it's transparency, it's monitoring, and it's working with the locals. So no surprises later on.
And so a quick question, as you move to a new site, we heard that drilling costs are one of the major drivers, but how much does it cost to go to a new area and do the risk management in terms of the amount of ground information that you have to acquire in maybe an area that you're not familiar with?
I guess we probably spent about $10 million on the exploration phase. We've been monitoring the area through Utah Geological Survey, Utah seismic stations since 1981. So we knew what the seismicity was, again, the 2 big issues, and what the water chemistry is. So I think relatively quickly we can get to a point where we can determine if the site is a good site or not. And also looking at the infrastructure. I think it's appropriate, I don't know if Tim was getting there, but basically the rocks we're looking at, these granites are found across the country. So they're the basement rocks everywhere in the country. And I think we're doing something that's comparable to anything we might do back east.
Very good. And Ramanan, how are we doing on time? We're still good, okay. Another question about the integration opportunities, and Mike, you had brought that up with perhaps Department of Defense and other ways. How do you get maximum value out of geothermal with its 24/7 and really get that priced into the marketplace?
It's a great question, and honestly, I point you to a study that Fervo did with Princeton on this very topic, looking at the utility of geothermal technologies to contribute to grid stability and innovate in that area as well as baseload power generation. You know, I mentioned the storage component of what we're doing, which does not require heat. there's a benefit from using hot water, more physically buoyant, in a storage system like I described. I'd say the opportunities are massive right now, and in particular, the demand. So Tim mentioned the huge demand for just baseload power led by data centers, et cetera, et cetera. There is an equally large demand for energy storage, which is price competitive. I was in Oklahoma last month. Texas also experiences the same thing they do, which is more than 10% curtailment of wind production in many, many markets, which basically means they can't put the power that they're generating anywhere quick enough. The grid is not built up enough. So energy storage is really a critical element of their economic model. I mean, we were talking with one of the two largest wind farm companies in the United States who are keen to really get new technologies to market in this area. So like Tim said, I think we're at a really important opportunity right now for that. So with the Department of Defense, they have a separate kind of budget, if you will, which is handy. They don't have to make things as price competitive, but they are also looking for energy storage and baseload at the same time. It's all hands on deck for both.
So you can replace some of those coal plants we were learning about in the previous modeling exercise. And any other comments in that space?
Yeah, the other thing I'd add, in addition to the valuable dispatchability and storage attributes that geothermal can provide, the other thing that makes it unique among renewable energy resources is the heat component. And we are starting to see, we started looking early on that a lot of the Zorbent technologies for direct air capture require an activation heat that is kind of the waste heat temperature for a geothermal power plant. And so as those technologies struggle to get to market, a big piece of it is how do you get the enormous energy requirements needed? And a lot of it's in the form of thermal energy and low-grade heat. And so we got a grant going back 2 years ago from the Chan Zuckerberg Institute to explore integration of direct air capture with geothermal, and that's expanded into, we were one of the award recipients on a teaming partner for what we call the Red Rocks DAC Hub, which is around our site in southwest Utah, looking at carbon sequestration potential. So that's a big area. And then there's other things as we looked into this market more where there's huge demands for low-grade heat in a whole host of different industries, food and agriculture, paper and pulp, you name it. And those companies often have just as ambitious climate targets as the big tech companies have, but getting cost-effective low-grade heat that's carbon-free has been an almost insurmountable challenge for them. And so, it's possible that the market for geothermal heat in the medium to long term might be even bigger than the market for geothermal power.
Well, very good. And I realize that I'm in a room full of geoscientists here. And so, Christine, let's kick off the questions from the audience.
If you don't mind, yeah, because I have a million I could ask. But I guess I want to go to Fervo, to Tim, because my understanding is that your well test that you described, your project test, was multiple.
Here for a mic.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
I understood that you were describing two horizontals with multiple parallel fractures, and you've got 12 months of successful constant heat supplied to the surface. We heard about geophones, but I thought I heard you say you have fiber optics. So do you have confirmation that you're getting uniform flow through these parallel fractures?
So, it's a great question, and the answer is we have some confirmation, not as much as we would like. Our experience with fiber optics was mixed. We've done fiber optics on 4 wells now. 2 of them are still recording and successful, and 2 of them recorded useful information during the well stimulation phase. But then we had both fibers in our horizontal wells severed at different stages of the operation. So we got about half lateral coverage in one well, and then only through the heel of the other well. So we don't have the direct production data that we would like to see there. But what we looked at from a cluster efficiency standpoint with the fiber optics that we were able to collect during that test was very encouraging. We had a very high cluster efficiency. And then the logging tools don't exist to log the production well, but because the injection well, you're pumping down it, you can cool it off enough, you can log the injection well. So we've done multiple injection flow production logs in the injection well, where we've seen a high degree of conformance across the different stages, including large contributions all the way down to the toe of the well, which is what you want to see. We've actually published that data in a couple different white papers that you can find that our CTO, Jack Norbeck, has authored. And so directionally, I think our philosophy on this is that you're not going to get uniform distribution across the fractures. Some fractures are going to connect, some aren't. And so for the time being, the way we solve that problem is dramatically over-designing the system. You know, we assume a percentage of the fractures connect and a large percentage do not connect. And one of the things that we think the cost and performance improvement over time is going to come from is getting a lot better at understanding what drives that. But what we've seen, and I think 12 months of production, it's not definitive. Everyone now that we have 12 months of production, everybody wants to know what 20 years of production looks like, but we're 19 years away from that. But what we've seen so far has been highly encouraging, that the conformance we see, the cluster efficiency we see, and the percentage of fractures that do form a connection are sufficient for commercial viability today. And so I think that's really the metric that matters most to us, because can you be profitable so you can do more projects, you can get on the learning curve so you can come down more in cost. But the short answer to your question is we have some data, not as much as we'd like, but the data we do have is very, very encouraging. No, because a short circuit would show up in the temperature profile, and we keep refining our history match over time. I can tell you, because the spacing on our pilot project is really tight spacing, because we were worried about not getting the right connection. So we knew that the thermal decline was going to be much more elevated than sort of a go forward project where we have much larger spacing. Our initial production forecast saw thermal decline starting 4 to 6 months into the project and then kind of entering a long gradual decline phase. Every month that goes by, we try to get a better history match because we still don't see the decline. So we do expect it to start declining at some point in the next 12 months, but 12 months ago, I thought it was also going to start declining in the next 12 months. So, you know, each day that goes by, the data just becomes much more valuable for our history matching.
Great presentations, and thank you for coming. I'm just wondering how long is the permitting takes for these things? And secondly, Tim, you may know from Eagleford experience cases of frac hits. Seen frac hits there for 3-4 miles. I know these are early days here, but what do you see if you have multiple operations of geothermal wells? In some ways, it's probably good, but do you see a negative effect of that too in these, or not really?
So multiple questions. First, permitting, and then
Permitting, it takes a long time, but it's getting better. There's actually true bipartisan consensus in DC on permitting reform, and actually, I think Mike would be interested to hear y'all's experience on private land, because it's really a tale of two stories. Unfortunately, the geothermal world's put in a spot where you either have to go to where the best geology is and deal with the federal permitting timelines, or go to less good geology but deal with more reasonable permit timelines. So, you know, our project. We just announced last week that we got our final NEPA approval to begin not just the drilling but the power plant construction phase of the site in Utah. And from the moment we filed for our first lease application there till we got our final NEPA approval for the Project Cape in Utah, it was about 5 years. And we are getting accolades for that being one of the smoothest and fastest NEPA federal permitting processes that have ever happened. So that's been our experience. You can permit them. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of time. What's exciting, you know, in addition to announcing our project last month, or our project approval last week, they also announced a new suite of categorical exclusions that are going under administrative review right now to really bring geothermal permitting on federal land to more parity with oil and gas permitting on federal land, which is a much more streamlined process. And we think that's going to be very, very helpful. But that's been our experience on federal land. It's challenging but doable, and we're actually quite optimistic that there's strong bipartisan support that's going to make it better in the near term.
If I could chime in too, everything he said it's spot on. And the challenge, you step back, you think a company even like Ormat, which is the world's largest private, publicly traded company working in geothermal, they're looking at timelines that easily were 7 to 10 years, even 5 years ago. So folks like Tim have gone to the Hill, brought forward this issue, made some progress. Honestly, that's remarkable. We at Sage dealt with this mainly by doing most of our testing in Texas. Let's just be honest. That's the fastest way to get to market, really, for us. I mean, we've looked at partnerships and have active partnerships in Europe. You can read about those in the permitting time, but it's beyond what we ever encounter, even in states like California, in terms of hesitancy to permit. We got a categorical exception exclusion at Ellington based on similarities from our work to other approved Air Force sites, in particular in Idaho. But that was the only way we were able to move forward and avoid the very arduous NEPA process that Tim mentioned. So we are very excited also about this progress on BLM land. Our private partnerships have offered us, though, in Texas, a really great way to move forward. And like Tim said, we kind of have to deal with the rocks that we get in those locations. But we've been working with McAllen Ranch, also Felo Martinez Ranch, South Texas operators who are interested in bringing forward a new generation of energy on their properties. And so they are able to work with us and use, thanks to lobbying efforts from Geothermal Rising and the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance, new rules in Texas that have clarified over the last 2 years where we stand with geothermal power production. Service ownership is really the definition of the heat ownership here for the last year, thanks to those efforts. So we've gotten a lot of clarity in Texas. We have a long way to go across the country, but we have a lot of hope that it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, just in general, we always kind of relate this to oil and gas, and we working with Pinnacle, we followed Mitchell with the Barnett to where we are, where stages were going, $6,000-$7,000 a stage down to whatever they are, $2,000, $2,500 a stage now. But I guess for the Fervo guys and the Sage guys, and for Joe and John, it seems like these guys got to go to the plate and hit a home run every time. And I guess is that the way you feel with your project? Because there's, from the transition from what George Mitchell did in the Barnett to where we are pretty much all the shale projects, there were a buku of wells drilled. And there's so many permutations from our limited experience. Maybe you want a perfectly working tractor to get down there, but I guess just in general, do you guys feel like you got to hit a home run every time you punch out a system? And are there lobbying efforts to provide that understanding that this is going to take time to develop? These systems are going to be optimized. I sincerely believe in what we're doing, and I think it will pay off. But one black eye can go a long way to set us back. So.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the things I'd point out there is it's interesting when you think about the trade-offs in designing of new experiments, because in some ways you want to test a wider variety of more radical approaches so that you can learn faster. And in other ways, you want to increase the likelihood that your next test is going to be successful. And I can tell you right now, we're funding our projects with about 99% of the capital that is going to go into, we have a couple Department of Energy grants that we're very excited about, but about 99% of the capital that goes into our project CAPE will come from private sources and investors that expect a return on that project. And so this is one of the areas where I think federal funding could help a lot, because we only want to test incremental things as a result. Because we know 300-foot spacing works, so let's try 400 and then 500, and then as long as it keeps working, we'll go there. Now, if your goal was to learn faster, you would say, okay, if 300 works, let's try 100 and let's try 1200, and we can collect a more disparate data set. But we have so much pressure, we can't afford to have a failed well right now, that it's forcing us to be a little bit more incremental in our R&D program than we would like to be. And so I think that's where more funding for DOE funding that goes into projects like ours, or increased funding for efforts like Utah Forge, would just make it a massively more successful learning curve. So far, we're 2 for 2. We've done 2 production well tests, and they've both been very successful and very much in line with our modeling results. And I would say, in the comparison to shale, it's a lot like shale. We couldn't have been 2 for 2 had it not been for the hundreds of thousands of wells drilled for shale. Sometimes I tell people that it's a little bit funny. We're doing the shale revolution, but in geothermal, but it's like we got given the textbook that had the answer key in the back, because it's like all the hard lessons learned over 25 years since the first Mitchell Energy well, we know those now. And yes, geothermal is different. It's a different geology. It's a different production system. But things like, screen outs, like the mitigation measures used on screen outs, those are the same in our wells as they are elsewhere. And so we get to kind of run through the innovation cycle of shale, longer laterals, more productive wells, more intense proppant loading, more productive stimulation treatments on speed mode, because we have the answer key, and we're not trying to reinvent the physics. We're just trying to apply it in a new domain.
If I could quote my friend Joshua from University of Chicago here, he pointed out we need 18 forges. Honestly, that would be the great answer to your question. If we had 18 forges, we could test all of these ideas, like Tim's saying, and work faster. Also, just if we take a step back, 5 years ago, there were only a few hints of the types of wells that Fervo is now drilling month after month. So the data is now coming in for the first time from what we're doing, and we're kind of learning how we can set expectations. For us at Sage, we also think beyond just, I would say, federal funding. Tim mentioned that less than $200 million amount, $80 million amount, which is so tiny compared to what, say, carbon capture or hydrogen have received. We've had to go to other entities, and we've been working with private industry, much more so in response to that. I would note, though, the hunger for innovation on this is global. We partner with ADNOC, which is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. They're looking for the future in Abu Dhabi for not only energy storage, but even geothermal. There's other groups out there. We're partnering with Romanian partners to look at direct heat use. Tim mentioned the ability to provide thermal capacity. They're not just power. So there's other partners out there. Of course, public spending would be ideal. I think we have to go in this thinking about educating. We're all ambassadors for the technology now, and we can speak to how it can succeed.
De-risking is one of the key goals of the Forge project, and we do need more forges. There's no question about that. But let me give you some examples. As owners of the well, some of the things that we've done. We've tested plugs, we've tested packers. Initially we had about 100% failure, but we've tried different ones. And eventually we did figure out how they work. We've tested particle drilling, and we've tested mud hammers in our wells with no liability to the companies who owns them. And I don't know how many oil and gas companies or geothermal companies would take a perfectly good well and say, well, why don't you go in there and see if you can drill with a mud hammer, and if we lose the hammer or we do irreparable damage to the well, there's no liability to you. So we are taking very, very significant risks in what we're doing, and that's, I think, critical. And we need that continued DOE support to do that.
All righty, with that, I think we're going to have to wrap up, and let's have a round of applause for a really great panel discussion. And like the lunch group, I'd like to get a photo, and you'll get your gift cards immediately, as you will have access to snacks and refreshments immediately after the event here. But thank you so much for a very good presentation. And the one thing we learned today is that geothermal is who can complete the sentence? It's a revolution. Okay, that's what we've heard. And so we'll take that. So thank you very much. And you all are such a great audience that we're going to offer snacks and refreshments to you as well here as we're done now. So,
Joe, thank you
very
so much for organizing this panel. There is a poster session outside. They've got about many of our students from University of Houston and Utah have put together posters. Please do attend those, and there'll be snacks. And so thank you all for attending. We greatly appreciate it. There is a session tomorrow at the Technology Bridge. It's much more of a workshop-style effort where we're going to be talking about potential collaborations. If you're interested, please let us know. We'd love to have you come and engage. It's in the Technology Bridge in Building 9. It starts at 8:30. Please come and join us then. So